All right, well, I'm going to introduce someone who, as well, is not unfamiliar to the organization. I think this is his third or maybe even fourth presentation. Ernie Cable. Ernie's a retired colonel, former squadron leader. And topic is Second Dawn of Aurora. And he was first involved as the operational requirements manager in the Aurora program office, and later in 1980 as the commanding officer 405 Squadron, overseeing the transition of, from the Argus to the Aurora. So somebody who's very well equipped to talk about the subject. So Ernie, would you like to take over here? Where are you?
Halloween, here you go.
There you go.
Thanks, Don. The subject of my talk tonight is the second dawn of Aurora, and we've all heard of double negatives. This is kind of like a double positive, because anybody know what the word Aurora means?
Dawn.
Dawn, right. Particularly the dawn of a new capability. And when I was in the Aurora program office, one of our tasks was to come up for a name for this Argus replacement. And after a lot of deliberation, we came up with the word Aurora, because it was a dawn of a new capability, in that we were jumping 4 or 5 generations of technology in going from the Argus to the CP-140 Aurora. So this is, I figured this was a good picture to start off with, because it's something that I've done, and I'm sure many of you have done, many times, done a dawn launch. So it's still dark and dirty. The marshal's out in front of the aircraft. He's got the wands hidden behind him, so we aren't blinding the pilot. Number 2 engine is running full bore. Number 3 engine is just starting. 1 and 4 engines have yet to start. Okay, so now we are ready to go. Now, in my presentation today, I'm going to use a lot of acronyms, and it's just through force of habit. I'm not trying to fool anybody, but I got myself into a bit of trouble once. Okay, like I said, I was asked to go to a staff college in Toronto and give a presentation on what the Auroras were doing in Operation Shark Guard in the Adriatic. It was one of the Aurora's first out-of-continent tasking. And so I flew up from Toronto, checked into the hotel, changed into my uniform, went down to grab a bite of lunch before my presentation that afternoon, and the waitress came up to me and she says, "Oh, I see you're in the Air Force." She said, "Yeah." I said, and I said, "I've been watching what's been going on over in the Adriatic, Operation Shark Guard," she says. I said, "Yeah, that's right." And she said, "I don't understand you guys. You guys speak a different lingo. You talk about F-18s and FIG-7s and AK-47s. It's a whole different language." And I said, "Yeah, it is a very different language." And so I said, "What do you recommend on the menu?" Just to step back, I said, "Yeah, we do speak in a lot of acronyms, that kind of thing." And so I said, what do you have on the menu?" She says, "Well, our BLTs are very good here." So I said, "Ah, see, you got your own acronyms." So I said, "Well, I'll have a BLT." And she says, "Will it be toasted or not toasted?" And I said, "Not toasted, thanks." So a short while later, she comes back with my non-toasted BLT, and I guess by the look on my face, she says, prompted her to ask, "Well, how do you like it?" I said, "Well, it's a little more moist than what I thought it was going to be, but it'll be okay. I'm sure." She says, "S-H-I-T." S-H-I-T? "Yeah, S-H-I-T. Should have it toasted."
You were going to give them some special high-intensity training.
Yeah. Okay. The title was the second dawn of Aurora, but let's go back to the first dawn. Okay, the first Aurora was delivered to 14 Wing Greenwood in April of 1980, and the 18th and last Aurora was delivered in August of 1981. Now, the Aurora is derived from the Lockheed American P-3C aircraft, from which it derives its long range and tremendous endurance. We're talking 14 hours in the air, unrefueled. And we have no problems flying across to England. Weather's bad, turning back, come back to Greenwood. The avionics, which is really the thing that makes the Aurora work, were derived from the U.S. Navy's S-3A Viking, their latest, at that time, carrier-borne aircraft that had the latest in avionics. And so when you took the long range of the P3 and you married that with the avionics of the S3, the Aurora wound up being acknowledged as one of the world's best ASW aircraft. ASW, everybody familiar with that term? I'm using acronyms again, anti-submarine warfare. Okay, so the Aurora went out and was doing the things that we did in the Argus, except we did it better and we did it longer, and we developed a very, very good reputation amongst our NATO allies, to the point that the Aurora was being invited to a whole lot of things that we wouldn't normally do because we brought a tremendous capability with the aircraft. Now, when you sit down and you're going to buy a fleet of airplanes, you say, well, how many do I buy? So you go to the government, you ask them, say, well, what do you want us to do? And the government says, I want you to do this, 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 and this. And then say, okay, to do that, we're going to need 24 aircraft. The government said, nah, it's a bit pricey for us. You can buy 18. So the number was reduced to 18, with no commensurate decrease in the tasking that they wanted us to do. And that's going to use, as you'll see in my presentation, that's going to turn around and bite us. Okay, when we were asked to deploy in NATO and UN sponsored activities, the Aurora performed extremely well. It demonstrated continually a 95% aircraft availability, and amongst all the coalition aircraft that were deployed on the operations that we were on, the Aurora wound up flying 25% of the missions with only 10% of the assets in theater. And that I'll show you later on, is going to be a problem for us. Again, first dawn, May 1980, Greenwood. This is the Aurora first arriving in Canada. This is the Aurora being welcomed into the Canadian Forces, as we called ourselves at the time. And this is part of the ceremony. The Chief of the Defense Staff was there, the Chief of the Air Staff, or Commander of Air Command, as we called them at the time. All kinds of press, representatives from foreign air forces and navies were all there to help us welcome the Aurora into the Canadian Air Force. And this is the crew here, and that's the crew that flew the first Aurora into Canada, and this guy here you might recognize. I said the Aurora performed extremely well. It was considered to be one of the most advanced ASW aircraft of its era. And this is a photograph took on one of the missions that I flew. This is a Yankee-class submarine-launched ballistic missile firer. Okay, we were tracking it off the coast of Labrador in the Labrador Sea, and then we were asked to go down to investigate it. Normally, we like to do ASW in the Aurora from about 15,000 feet. Okay, no, not like we used to do in the Argus, get down to 300 feet. So it's much better. So we came down, and this is what we came across. This is a Delta-class submarine. Its sail, conning tower, had just pierced the surface, which was probably done accidentally. But being so close to the surface, it showed us this thing here. This is a rescue hatch. So if the boat were to ever sink and the crew had to be rescued, that white ring is what they'd use to aim the diving bell to go down attached to the submarine to rescue the crew. We also did ESW in the Arctic. This is an Aurora, not too far from the North Pole, working with two submarines. This is a U.S. Navy Sturgeon-class submarine. This is a British Swiftsure-class submarine, and this is not an Aurora, but it's a USN P-3, but the picture was taken from an Aurora. We're doing a photo op. It's something that Donald Trump borrowed from us. And when you get close up, this is what a U.S. Navy Sturgeon-class looks like. You notice that the crew is out here. And in fact, just off to one side of the picture, the crews from the two submarines met, and they were holding a barbecue at the North Pole. I want to get into the Aurora Modernization. In the mid-1990s, the Aurora was losing its operational edge, as its obsolescent sensors and avionics were not as effective against the latest, more sophisticated targets. More critically, the original electronics manufacturers were not producing spare parts and were no longer committed to repairing and overhauling relatively small volumes of obsolescent equipment. In 1997, the government approved the Aurora Incremental Modernization Program, or AIMP, which aimed at modernizing the flight and mission avionics by replacing the original systems and subsystems to restore the operational capability and improve the reliability and supportability. The AIMP would not only restore the aircraft's impressive maritime capabilities, but also provide new dimensions in surveillance, reconnaissance, and intelligence gathering. The improved Aurora would be truly a national strategic aircraft capable of operating over land or sea anywhere in the world. Ideally, the new avionics and sensors should have been installed while each Aurora underwent a regularly scheduled periodic third-line inspection under an omnibus program. But because of fiscal considerations, the government decided on an incremental approach to be implemented over a 10-year period, with completion in 2008. With the incremental approach, the $1.1 billion program cost was more expensive than the omnibus scheme, but was more affordable by stretching the cost over 10 years. The AIMP consisted of 23 individual projects that were grouped into 4 blocks. Block 1 was to replace the legacy projects that had to be implemented to keep the Aurora compliant with the international aviation regulations, things like strobe lights and things like that to make us compatible with the current air regs. In Block 2, the navigation and flight instruments were to be modernized, and a new communications management system to integrate the UHF, VHF, HF, and SATCOM radios. Block 3 was to replace the mission computer, software, and displays, provide an acoustic processor, new electronic surveillance, electro-optics, and synthetic aperture imaging radar. Block 4 was for Phase 2 enhancements to the main computer, updating the magnetic anomaly detection system, and provide a defensive electronic warfare system. It was planned to sequentially install Block 1 in each of the 18 Auroras upon completion of Block 1, each aircraft would sequentially return to the AIMP contractor, which was IMP Aerospace and Defense in Halifax, 3 more times for the installation of Blocks 2, 3, and 4. Since the contractor would have up to 5 Auroras in the modification line at any one time, the number of aircraft available for operations was significantly reduced and prompted a commensurate reduction in manning levels. Because of the phased approach, there would be a mix of Block 2, 3, and 4 Auroras available for operations during the 10-year implementation period. This complicated training because maintenance and air crews had to be concurrently qualified on more than one aircraft block configuration. Additionally, as aircraft were sequenced through the modification process, flight simulators and maintenance training devices had to be similarly modified to reflect the latest Block 1, 2, and 3 configuration. Because of the small fleet size, remember go back now to fleet sizing. Because of the small fleet size and heavy tasking, the Auroras were exhibiting signs of structural fatigue much sooner than anticipated. In fact, the Auroras were flying at a 50% greater rate than the US Navy's P-3Cs, which were also showing early signs of structural fatigue. If the flying rate persisted, the Aurora's life expectancy was projected to expire much sooner than planned, around the year 2020. The Aurora life expectancy problem was compounded in early 2000, when during a routine third-line periodic inspection, corrosion was detected in the interior structure of the Aurora's wings and horizontal stabilizers. A follow-on structural assessment program, a shared venture with Norway and other P-3C nations, confirmed that the fleet-wide corrosion would compromise the structural integrity and reduce the life expectancy of most P-3 type aircraft to the 2012-2015 timeframe. An Aurora Structural Life Extension Program, commonly known as ASLEP, would be required to extend the life of Canada's Auroras until 2025. The ASLEP cost was estimated at $25 million per aircraft, $450 million for a fleet of 18, bringing the total AIMP ASLEP cost close to $1.7 billion. And these were the things that had to be done. The big problem were the spar caps in the wings, and they had to be replaced. Similarly, there was corrosion going on in the tailplanes, and this was common through the PC fleet. And again, it's flying in the corrosive maritime environment. I said we'd like to fly at 15,000 feet during the search phase, but during the attack and localization phase, we do drop down to 300, 100 feet. The items in yellow, they were suspect and were to be replaced just upon inspection if required. In 2005, the government conducted a fiscal review, and AIMP and ASLEP were put on hold to determine the most cost-effective way to proceed. In 2007, the government announced that as part of its austerity program, the number of Auroras slated for incremental avionics improvement and life extension programs would be reduced to only 10 aircraft, a draconian reduction in surveillance capability for a nation with the longest coastline in the world. The government's 2008 Canada First Defence Strategy included plans to replace the Aurora fleet with a new multi-mission maritime aircraft, such as the Boeing P-8 Poseidon, derived from the 737 airliner and selected by the US Navy to replace its P-3C fleet. Boeing estimated that it could provide Canada a fleet of P-8s for $3.1 billion, but D&D's analysis estimated the total program cost, including support infrastructure, to be closer to $5 billion, a cost that far exceeded the combined price for AIMP ASLEP. Boeing also advised that the first Poseidons would not be available to Canada until 2015, too late to replace the fleet of Auroras. In addition to the P-8, other options such as unmanned aerial vehicles and Canadian-built multi-mission aircraft were considered. By 2011, there was no substantive progress on a procurement of an Aurora replacement. D&D was faced with the conundrum of having spent close to $1 billion on AIMP to make the Aurora sensors viable until 2025. But belatedly found that the Aurora's airframe would be airworthy only until the 2012-2015 timeframe. Finally, after a period of indecision, false starts, lobbyist wars, ill-considered qualitative and quantitative reductions, all alternatives to modernizing the Aurora were rejected. The government reinstated the combined AIMP ASLEP, now called the Aurora Capability Extension Program, but still for only 10 aircraft. The former 4-block modernization program was streamlined into 3 blocks. Delivery of the Block 2 Auroras to Fort Ring Greenwood was completed in 2012, and the first Auroras were inducted into the Block 3 modification line at IMP in Halifax. In 2012, the Air Force advised the government that with only 10 Auroras, the proposed tasks in the Canadian Forces defense strategy could not be fulfilled. In March 2014, the Harper government announced that a fleet of modernized, life-extended CP-140s would be expanded to 14 aircraft. In the first phase of the $548 million undertaking, the existing contracts for the first 10 aircraft were extended to include work on the 4 additional aircraft. The revised Block 2 included 3 new major capability enhancements to the original Block 2 equipment. The Block 3 update modifications plus life extension on all 14 aircraft are scheduled for completion by 2021. Extending the estimated life expectancy of the modernized Aurora designated the CP-140M Aurora from 2020 to 2030. Now, Operation Mobile was a NATO-led mission to enforce United Nations resolutions calling for a maritime arms embargo and no-fly zones in Libya. The Block 2 Auroras made their first operational debut in Task Force Libya, the air component of the expeditionary deployment to Libya in 2011. The 2 assigned Block 2 Auroras, supported by a 60-person detachment, brought a number of unique intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities to the campaign. And I'll be referring to that as ISR, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. The new communications management system allowed the aircrew to talk with as many as 6 agencies simultaneously. The capability, along with its endurance and space for specialist personnel workstations, made the Aurora an excellent airborne command and control node. Concurrent with the Block 2 modifications, an Overland Electronic Mission Suite, or OEMS, was installed to replace the original forward-looking infrared camera with a Westcam MX-20 electro-optical infrared system. The new electro-optical infrared camera was capable of collecting imagery day or night from long standoff distances. The GPS position of the camera's bore sight intersection with the ground provided a precise geographic location of the target in view. The Overland Electronic Mission Suite not only greatly improved situational awareness, but it could cue the EO/IR camera to targets of interest. It's my first exposure to this kind of system was when I was on exchange with the U.S. Navy. And then this goes back into the early 1970s when I was on exchange with them. But the kind of capability that it was producing in the 1970s was that a P-3, which I was flying at the time, could stand 20 kilometers off the beach and read the name tag of the personnel on the beach. The EO/IR imagery could be stored for post-flight analysis or assigned to a tactical common data link for transmission to other remote video receivers or to ground station terminals where target specialists could take control of the camera to scan for collateral damage. The Overland Electronic Mission System also received contacts from the Automated Identification System that provided real-time position and movement of shipping traffic, significantly reducing the time to identify unknown targets during both expeditionary and maritime surveillance operations. I want to talk about the AIS. The AIS is a satellite-based system. It's run by the U.S. Navy. And this system keeps track of every ship, every friendly ship that has a transponder on it, much like an aircraft system has. And you can go to the data terminal, and they'll when they were showing it to me the first time, they say, "Where do you think HMCS Saskatchewan is?" I says, "I have no idea." It says, "It's right there." Okay. So the nice thing about having the AIS system is you can send an aircraft out there, and it can say, "Here's all the ships in the area that we know about, and from our radar and electro-optical systems, here are the ones that don't show up on AIS. So those are the ones that require investigation." The Aurora's ISR successes were built largely on a number of civilian surveillance operations, including the 2009 Amplex high-resolution camera mapping system. When the Army first went into Afghanistan, there was an awful lot of area that was unmapped, uncharted. So one of the first tasks the Aurora did was to go in and map all of this uncharted area, giving the Army at least a photographic map of what Afghanistan looked like, where the hills and mountains and rivers and towns were. In 2009, the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit in Trinidad And in 2010, surveillance missions during the Vancouver Winter Olympics and the 2010 G8 and G20 summits in Toronto. Aurora crews also gained experience by manning ground station control vans for the Heron UAV intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions during Athena in Afghanistan, then returned to Aurora Operations for their deployment. It was interesting that the Aurora was just getting this brand new capability. The Block 2 aircraft were just coming online, but the governments were concerned with security for things like the Vancouver Olympics, the G8 and G20. So one of the things that they asked the Aurora to do is to conduct surveillance around these areas, looking for things that are unusual. I guess the most obvious one would be terrorists, people that wanted to disrupt these events. So the Aurora was deployed as far away as Trinidad to look after the Heads of Commonwealth meeting there, and as I said, back to the Winter Olympics and the G8 and G20. The Aurora's endurance and Block 2 modifications made it a natural choice for an expanded new role, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and control missions over coastal areas and eventually over land. Because of its traditional teaming with naval vessels in anti-submarine warfare, the Aurora was the preferred platform for naval gunfire support missions during Op Mobile, a tactic where warships received target positions based on aircraft radar or electro-optical IR information to fire missiles or gun salvos at targets beyond the ship's radar range. In fact, sometimes the ships didn't even turn on the radar to advertise their position. They just stayed silent and took all the data that was being transmitted to them from the Auroras. The high resolution video enabled embarked naval observers to positively identify targets, verify compliance with the rules of engagement, and pass information to the cooperating NATO warships. The Aurora's EOIR camera provided superior imagery from ranges that did not alert the target, while its multi-band radios permitted seamless, secure reporting to participating warships without compromising routine communications. After the Libyan capital, Tripoli, fell, the Auroras in their ISR and C missions moved from the Mediterranean to entirely overland, where the reduced target standoff distances improved the image quality exponentially. Cross-queuing of information between the Auroras and the UAV fleets provided more analysis and corroboration of information before passing it along to operations centers. The more timely and accurate information flow enabled the Aurora to undertake yet a new role, that of strike coordination and armed reconnaissance missions, where fighter aircraft were talked onto their targets using Aurora radar and electro-optical infrared video. On other occasions, UAVs were tasked to investigate Aurora reports when legitimate targets were positively identified, and armed UAVs or tactical aircraft were tasked to engage the target. This is the mobile areas here. The Auroras operated out of the Italian Air Force Station in Sigonella in Sicily here. They were co-located with the other maritime aircraft that were involved in Op Mobile. And this is the maritime area that they were tasked to patrol. Then once they gained confidence as to what the threat was over inland Libya, then the aircraft moved inland. As I said, initially the Auroras were assigned surveillance missions over the Mediterranean, shown in red. With the advantage of the AIS, the Auroras were quickly able to assign surface contacts to the data link network, providing NATO naval forces along the Libyan coast a much greater horizon, making their task of enforcing the maritime embargo much easier. The Aurora's transition from the Mediterranean to overland role was not immediate. Only after the air threat and the intelligence picture were better understood when the Auroras allowed to patrol closer to shore. Closing nearer to the coastal cities and inland supply routes increased the quality of the imagery. The analysts and mission planners were better able to follow troop movements and fuel trucks and monitor traffic flows and other indicators of everyday life. With other ISR platforms stretched thinly, the Aurora became the preferred ISR platform. Canadian imagery products were praised by higher headquarters for their quality and were often the first with eyes-on important intelligence. The kind of thing that its range and persistent, able to remain over an area of interest, such as a town or a city. Just watching what goes on underneath. On one occasion, there was a white pickup truck, and in mid-afternoon, I always went to the same villa in a town. He said, "Well, why does it do that?" And so they asked the question, "Well, where does it come from?" So they can track it back and say, "Oh, this has started here." And eventually, by putting together all this kind of intelligence, it comes up with a very accurate picture of what's going on the ground below. The Aurora's endurance and Block 2 modifications made it a natural choice for an expanded new role: intelligence, surveillance, and control. Missions over coastal areas and eventually over land, because of its traditional teaming with naval vessels in the anti-surface warfare role, was the preferred platform for naval gunfire support missions during OPMOBILE, the tactic where warships received target positions based on aircraft, radar, or electro-optical information to fire missiles or gun salvos at targets beyond the ship's range. During ISR and sea missions in the Mediterranean, the Aurora's camera detected and tracked surface contacts from long standoff ranges. High-resolution video enabled embarked naval observers to positively identify the targets, verify compliance with the rules of engagement, and then pass information to cooperating naval warships. This is another aspect of something that we didn't used to have to worry about 20 years ago, were the rules of engagement. Because we had very, very strict rules, because the command and control authorities were very, very conscious about collateral damage to civilians and civilian organizations and structures. The Aurora's EOI can provide superior imagery from images that did not alert the target, while the multiband radios provided seamless, secure reporting to participating warships without compromising communications. After the Libyan capital Tripoli fell, the Aurora's ISR and sea missions moved from the Mediterranean to entirely over land, with reduced standoff distances provided image quality, improved image quality exponentially. Cross-killing information between the Auroras and the UAV fleets provided more analysis and corroboration of information before passing it along to operations centers. The more timely and accurate information flow enabled the Aurora to undertake yet a new role, that of strike coordination and armed reconnaissance, SCAR missions, where fighter aircraft were talked onto their targets using Aurora radar, electro-optical, infrared video. On other occasions, UAVs were tasked to investigate Aurora reports when legitimate targets were positively identified. When legitimate targets were positively identified, armed UAVs or tactical aircraft were tasked to engage the target. Similar to the naval gunfire support missions, an embarked SCAR coordinator, that's strike coordination and armed reconnaissance coordinator, was responsible for positively identifying military installations, vehicles, troop concentrations as legitimate targets, and confirming compliance with the rules of engagement before communicating the target location to tactical aircraft or armed UAVs for engagement. Again, the Aurora's endurance allowed it to stay over the surveillance area for sustained periods to build an accurate intelligence picture by identifying and correlating targets with other platforms, estimating potential collateral damage, and assessing post-attack damage. Operation Impact is the Canadian expeditionary mission to help the forces of the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, commonly known as ISIL, from overrunning Iraq and Syria. In the fall of 2014, two CP-140M Block 3 Auroras made their first operational deployment to Kuwait, with an associated network of support, with an associated network to support new systems being stress tested for the first time in combat. It was immediately apparent that Op Impact would be quite different from Op Mobile in Libya. The strike coordination and attack missions during Op Mobile took place in a well-defined battle space. The enemy had been identified, and a robust coalition command and control structure established. Op Impact, however, would begin with very little in place, and the aircraft and crews would immediately be over hostile territory with no confidence building period beforehand. The ISIL forces were more dispersed and better armed than the Libyans, and were indiscernible from the friendly ground forces. It was in this environment that the CP-140M very successfully adapted to Op Impact, performing similar ISR and control missions as the Block II Auroras in Libya, except with more capable communications and senders. In 2016, the newly elected Canadian government attempted to withdraw all RCAF aircraft from the Iraqi campaign. However, coalition leaders argued successfully to retain the CP-140Ms, as they had proven to be an irreplaceable intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and control asset. The coalition forces also won the argument to retain the CC-150 Polaris as a tanker, because a tanker is with fighter aircraft is a force multiplier. This is what an Aurora looks like when it's flying out of Kuwait. As you might expect, in the middle of the desert, and the crews had to deal with sand, very, very hot temperatures, particularly the ground crews. This is the area that we were operating in Iraq. We were based in Kuwait down here, and most of the targets were in northern Iraq and scattering over in Syria. The Baghdad is in this area here, Damascus over here, Mosul, it's up here somewhere. The Block 3 modifications to all 14 Auroras will be installed in 2 phases and will not be completed until 2021, another 4 years. However, several of the Auroras have completed the first phase of their Block 3 installations, and these aircraft are deployed to Kuwait for Op Impact. The first phase of Block 3 CP-140M Auroras are equipped with synthetic aperture radar that provides almost monochromic photo quality image of the terrain and targets, such as tanks and buildings, at much greater ranges. The new radar's moving target indicator will track moving targets undetectable by the naked eye or the electro-optical or infrared camera in both the overland and maritime environments. An improved electronic support measures system will give the Aurora a very capable electronic intelligence gathering capability. A new sonobuoy acoustic processing system and magnetic anomaly detection system will improve the CP-140M's ability to search, detect, track, and engage increasingly sophisticated subsurface targets. The Aurora Modernization Program is a Canadian innovation success story, with Canadian industry delivering a world-class capability. The program is creating highly skilled jobs across the country, designing and manufacturing cutting-edge technologies, including submarine acoustic detection systems from General Dynamics Canada here in Ottawa, synthetic aperture radars from McDonald Depweiler and Associates in Vancouver, electro-optical systems from L3 Westcam through Lockheed Canada, submarine magnetic anomaly detection systems from CAE in Montreal, computer systems integration by General Dynamics in Ottawa, and the installation work for the avionics and sensor modernization and structural light construction projects are performed by IMP Aerospace in Halifax. During the second phase of Block 3, 3 new systems will be installed that will add a quantum increase in the Aurora's surveillance capability. To address the Block 2 Aurora's limitations of having to be within line of sight of ground stations to transmit electro-optical and infrared video in real time, the second phase of Block 3 will install a beyond line of sight video, voice, and data communication satellite system. The beyond line of sight system will revolutionize ISR and control missions, by being able to transmit photos, recorded video, and voice communications in real time to any site in the world via satellite. With the ability to send live video from the electro-optical IR camera to distant ground stations from high Arctic latitudes, the CP-140M patrolling the Northwest Passage in the Arctic will be able to send live video of shipping and remote Indian villages directly to Ottawa. To take immediate advantage of the beyond line-of-sight communications impact, the RCAF recently approved the interim installation of a new satellite antenna on the upper fuselage of 3 CP-140Ms. 2 of the Auroras with the interim beyond line-of-sight capability have already been employed in theater, providing a new capability to transmit real-time information to intelligence specialists and mission planners. The ability for the theater commander in distant headquarters to observe a developing situation in real time reduces the ambiguity of combat engagements and decreases the delays in the targeting process. This is the CP-140M, and this is the beyond line-of-sight antenna. The Aurora's got a gazillion antennas spread all over the fuselage, but this is probably the most prominent one and provides really a worldwide capability from its with its surveillance materials. And of course, if you have put satellite in the capability in the aircraft, you've also got to provide a ground station to receive the data. And this is when putting some satellite receivers into the bases in Kuwait. Two other second phase Block 3 updates will replace the current tactical common data link with the NATO-compatible Link 16 to improve interoperability with allies and install a large aircraft infrared countermeasure system to provide a self-defense capability that will autonomously detect air-to-surface missiles and then direct a laser beam to jam the missile's infrared guidance system. The Aurora structural life extension breathed an additional 15,000 hours into the Aurora, extending its life expectancy to about 2030. The relatively modest $2 billion cost of modernizing the Aurora will give Canada one of the most capable surveillance aircraft in the world with the latest technology, ISR, and control capabilities. The U.S. Navy publicly stated that the systems in the CP-140M Aurora are performing at a level they hope to attain with their newly acquired P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft in 10 years. Most importantly, the modernized CP-140M Aurora will provide a significant reduction in sensor-to-shooter delays, which will greatly increase the probability of successfully engaging targets. Although the CP-140M has been described as having a dazzling technology worthy of a James Bond Agent 707 movie, the persistent sleuthing skills of Sherlock Holmes more accurately describe its capabilities. And the sleuthing aspect is really important here because it can investigate these things that you can't do in a UAV, like the example of the white pickup truck. Why is it there? Where is it going? What is it doing? Who does it meet? Those kinds of things. Now, that's the end of the mission I wanted to talk about Libya and Iraq. And this is a typical end of mission scenario where the marshal is up there saying, brakes on, number 1 and 4 engines are shut down, number 2 engine is shutting down, and number 1 engine is still running. However, I wanted to add a postscript to this. We are seeing, with our operations in Iraq, we're seeing a deja vu of what was occurring in the 1990s. Remember in the 1990s, where the Aurora was flying at 50% greater rate than the P-3s, and they were in a very, very high demand. Same thing here in Iraq and Syria. It's been 3 years of non-stop flying. There's been too few crews and aircraft available, so we're starting to wear the aircraft out. The crews and aircraft are strained to meet the high demand. Again, we're in the process of we were earlier, where we're flying 25% of the missions with 10% of the assets. The Aurora is that successful, and we're wearing it out. Where the crews, both the air crews and ground crews, are in a similar situation, where we now have ground crews and air crews who are now on their third or fourth rotation into Iraq, because we have too few crews, okay? And the experience and the experience of operating in these kind of environments, it's a new environment, the ISR thing for the role, particularly in the overland role. So we aren't exposing enough people to that kind of warfare. One of the problems of having too few people in the area. Now, in July 2017, just a couple of months ago, we reduced the number of Auroras in Iraq from 2 to 1. The government will tell you it's because we emulsify and we don't need 2 Auroras. The true fact is that we're flying the pants off the Auroras and we're exceeding the fatigue limits as to what we want to do with it. So you do what we did back in the 1990s. You fly less. This is what the tactical compartment looks like in Aurora. This happens to be the navigator station, and this is the display that he looks at. Now, all of the displays in the tactical compartment, they're all interchangeable. Everybody can look at everybody else's information. Navigators can see the radar operators can see the navigation, and those kinds of things. And this is the keyboard that they operate. Some of the analog navigation systems that they have, just in case the computer goes completely. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention to you occurred in June of this year. The Royal Norwegian Air Force was celebrating its 75th anniversary, and they wanted to commemorate that by holding a symposium at their main maritime air base in Andoya, and the northern tip of Norway. You can see it's well above the Arctic Circle. So the Norwegians offered the Arctic Maritime Patrol Challenge, okay, and it was a competition in which a number of countries that operate maritime aircraft were invited. The Norwegians with their home squadron, number 333 Squadron, flying their updated P-3s. The French Navy was there with 21 Squadron flying their updated Atlantic 2s. The U.S. Navy was there from Jacksonville, flying their VP-16, or flying P-8s from VP-16 in Jacksonville. And Canada was represented by 415 Squadron from Greenwood with our CP-140Ms. Now, the competition started off with a symposium in which everybody said, here's what we're doing, here's what our problems are, here's how we think we can solve them. Does anybody else have the same kind of problems? An exchange of information. Great idea. So then there came to be a flying competition for the actual trophy, in which it involved airborne search and rescue and anti-submarine warfare. The aircraft had to take off. They had to meet an exact takeoff time, and they had to go through various waypoints and meet those on the second, enter into an area, detect a subsurface target, and then leave that area. And if you look at northern Norway, there's a whole bunch of islands off the coast. Somewhere among those islands, there was a search and rescue incident in which there were people that were supposedly had crashed in an airplane. There were people that were surviving, some injured more seriously than others. The aircraft had to go there and determine what the situation was like. And the aircraft that could do that the fastest with the most accuracy won the challenge. Now I'm pleased to say 415 Squadron with the CP-140M were the winners. They won the first maritime, or the first Arctic challenge. So the airplane is gradually regaining some of the prestige that it had in its earlier heydays. In fact, it's exceeding it. One other thing that I will mention, conspicuous by their absence, and the people that were participating here were the Brits. The Brits had a very, very strong maritime air component in the RAF. As you probably know, they got rid of all of their Nimrods and were no longer in the business. But they were missed terribly. It was a strategic asset that the nation missed. So as you're probably aware, the Brits are now buying P-8 Poseidons, but they won't be there for a couple of years yet. So what the Brits are doing in the interim, they have their crews flying with us and the Americans and other people that are operating aircraft that have the same technologies as what their P-8s will have when they take delivery in a couple of years. Now it's the end of the real mission. Okay, that's the things that I wanted to mark with you tonight, and now I'm open for any questions. You.
Those rotations in Kuwait and Sicily, what would be the frequency of crew rotation? And I assume there would be a rotation of aircraft as well.
Yes.
I mean, would the tour be, for a crew, be, say, 3 months, 6 months, or what?
Yeah, again, the question was, what was the rotation cycle for the crews and aircraft? And the answer is, yes, there definitely was a rotation cycle. And normally it would, and I'm putting, no two rotations are the same. It depends on a whole bunch of other things. But normally you can probably count on 6 months. The aircraft might be rotated more frequently than that as you come across unserviceabilities that can only be repaired back in Greenwood. When you consider that we've been over there for 3 years, that's 36 months. Some crews are on their 4th rotation, about 6 months, periodically. Any other questions?
Yeah, Ernie, great talk. What was the standard crew? Like how many and what were their positions? And did any of the ventures warrant 2 crews to be on board?
Good question. The question is, what was the makeup of the crews, and did it ever require more than 1 crew to be on board? The basic Aurora crew consists of 2 pilots, a flight engineer, 2 navigators, and 4 sensor operators. And one of the nice things that we quite accidentally built into the Aurora was a place for a spare workstation for another crew member. Well, this fit quite nicely in. Remember on the naval gunfire support missions and on the SCAR missions, the Surveillance Strike Coordination and Armed Reconnaissance missions, we had specialist air crews, people who, in the case of the naval gunfire support missions, they were usually naval officers that would come aboard and say, yeah, that's a certain kind of ship, and that's the one that we want, and yes, it's doing what it's legally it's authorized to do, or no, it's violating whatever the maritime embargo is, and therefore should be engaged. Same thing with the SCAR missions. There's usually it was either an Army officer or an Air Force fighter pilot who was familiar with attacking targets, particularly when it came to saying, you know, you want to approach this target from the west because of whatever reason, kind of thing, and to be able to guide the aircraft onto the target. Notwithstanding that they're using laser-guided weapons, you know, they've got to be launched from the right envelope in order to hit the target. So no, there was never 2 crews. Back in the Argus days, we always flew with a crew and a half because we were airborne for 18 hours many times. These missions were probably around 10 hours. And again, it was just the kind of thing, just loitering over an area of interest, just seeing what's going on, collecting the data, and seeing who's coming, who's going, what they're doing, whereabouts are the fuel tankers going, where are they getting their fuel, where are they delivering the fuel, who's picking up the fuel after it's delivered, those kinds of things. Just kind of sort of sitting back and saying, let's just watch what's going on here. So that was basically, it would be an augmented crew, a standard Aurora crew with usually some specialist personnel on board. Yes.
Is there any thought of, you talked about shortening the time between sensing and shooting. Is there any thought of arming the aircraft with something like a Hellfire?
Yeah. The question is there in order to successfully engage a target, you want to minimize the time from it is first detected as a legal target to the time you fire something at it. So the question is, why wouldn't you put armament on an Aurora? That has been discussed many times, and I guess the short answer is it's a soft-skinned airplane. You don't want that Aurora going too near a target. The Aurora, being a valuable asset, is much better to stand off, call in a UAV, an armed UAV, to go and attack the target. It's probably the most invulnerable of the weapons we have. Then you have TAC air, tactical air, coming in with F-18s, what have you. Those guys are specialists at attacking those kinds of targets. So you don't want, and it requires a tremendous amount of training. Aurora crews, like most maritime crews, are specialists in the surveillance portion of what they do. So think of the training that we'd have to do. You have to make them all mini fighter pilots in order to get the aircraft into a position where it could safely launch a target and be able to escape the area. So no, you don't want to put weapons on a soft-skin airplane. Basically speaking, have somebody else that's an expert in delivering weapons. Let them do it, and we'll provide the eyes and ears.
I think the American Poseidons, their P-8s, they're armed, aren't they?
Yes, they are. But they have a different operating philosophy than what we have. Yeah, when they send their P-8s in, they also send a squadron of F-18s in with it, and we don't have that luxury. We're doing well to get 4 F-18s over there in theater because we don't have enough of them.
What happened to the Arcturus?
Sad story. Going back to fleet sizing, so we wanted 24 airplanes. Said, no, you can only have 18. That means there were 6 that we didn't get. When Lockheed came to the end of the P3 reduction line, or P3 production line, there were 6 aircraft left over that they didn't have sales for. So they came to Canada and said, you guys wanted 24 airplanes at one time. We've got a sale on 6 P3 airframes that you could use. So we wound up, because we hummed and hawed and debated whether we should or not, by the time we said yes, 3 were sold, so there were 3 left. We took the last 3. And it was, and we got them under the political guise of being a Arctic surveillance aircraft, okay? Because rather than take an aircraft like an Aurora that's got a whole bunch of expensive avionics in it that couldn't be really used. For example, you don't need sonobuoys, for example, over the Arctic. So why have an airplane that's got a very sophisticated acoustic system flying over the Arctic? Take a stripped down version of the Aurora, such as the Arcturus, we call it the CP-140A, and send those kinds of aircraft up there. It had a very good radar, a very good navigation system, and it was great for doing Arctic reconnaissance. It was also a very valuable airplane as a transport airplane. For example, sometimes when an aircraft went unserviceable in Keflavik, Iceland, it needs an engine. It needs a spare part. Well, because the Aurora was a unique airplane, not all the parts were compatible with the U.S. Navy's P-3. So you had to fly a spare part up that you couldn't get from other sources. So having our own Arcturus able to go to the supply bins, pull it out of the supply bins, and then 7 or 8 hours later be downtown Iceland with your spare part.
So what happened to them?
Oh, they as part of the reduction, the question was what happened to them. Is that we're cutting back, and these airplanes are a nice to have thing. We're so it's just part of the cost reduction. So one of the Arcturus is in the museum in Greenwood, and the other two I think are being cut up for spare metal. I should point out one of the things that I omitted. I said with the Auroras we're going from 18 to 14. We're really going from 18 to 10 because of those 14 airplanes. The last 4 airplanes, they are equipped for but not with the sensors. So what that allows you to do is when you have one of your fully instrumented CP-140Ms has to go into long-term maintenance, you take the avionics out of that airplane and you put it into one of the 14 airplanes. So no matter how you cut it, we only have 10 operational airplanes. The other 4 are take up the slack for the aircraft that are going through maintenance. So now you have 10 airplanes that are fully operational, and then you take your on your average serviceability rate, let's say 70%. So now you have 7 operational airplanes for a country to conduct coastal maritime surveillance for a country with the longest coastline in the world. It doesn't make an awful lot of sense to some of us.
Do you have recording equipment on board for fatigue, like recording accelerometers?
The question is there any equipment on board the aircraft to record the fatigue? The answer is very definitely yes. And this is how we knew in the first place that the Auroras were in fact fatiguing, and the problem was exacerbated by the fact that there was corrosion in the main planes and the tail planes. And one of the things, I wasn't very popular when I was CO because we had this new airplane that could go like stink. It could, and at air shows we used to run across in front of the crowd at 350 knots, pull up into a vertical dive, and then do a wing over, and then dive back down. And then one day the maintenance officer came to me and said, you know, you guys are putting a whole bunch of fatigue on these airplanes. And I said, you're right. And I said, the bad part is that this is just showmanship. This isn't the air show is to show the public what we do with the airplane every day in service. This is not what we do with this airplane every day in service. So I told my crews, we aren't going to do that anymore, okay? Because we're going to wear out the airplane. So yes. Yes?
So when our Aurora is not flying these missions, what other aircraft in the other countries are doing the same job?
Well, the Americans are in the process of converting over from their P3s to their P8s. The Brits totally have nothing and are waiting for their P8s to show up. The Norwegians have bought P8s and haven't taken delivery yet, but it'll be quite a while. The French have always done their own thing, and the Australians are buying P8s. And the New Zealanders are sitting on the fence trying to figure out how they can buy P8s. So eventually everybody is going to P8s. I should point out one of the other things that the Americans have going for them, and Tim kind of alluded to this earlier on, was the Americans have a system called BAMS. And it's called, anyways, it's a series of satellites that are orbiting the Earth, kind of thing, doing surveillance from space. And they're using their P-8 aircraft as pouncers. When they see something from a satellite that ought to be investigated, like unusual traffic in the Malacca Straits, for example, say, okay, this doesn't look right, we should go and have a closer look. So they'll deploy a P-8 squadron somewhere into the Indian Ocean. So it's...
Well, I'm thinking specifically more about the intelligence issues that we do, like say in Operation Mobile or in Iraq. So we can't be flying all the time. So who's covering for us when we're not out there?
There are specialized aircraft that in fact do that. They are intelligence collectors. There are versions of the 707, for example, that do nothing but collect intelligence. But they're very, very specialized. it's not talking kind of tactical intelligence like we're doing in the Aurora. It's more strategic intelligence that they're going after. Not saying that they don't have infrared capabilities and using gallium arsenide lasers and so on to see what's going on the ground. If you ask any kind of military commander, the problem is there are too few of them. Because there are too few of these intelligence collecting aircraft, they're in extremely high demand. And this is why the Aurora kind of slipped into its niche in Libya and Iraq, because it had the capability to fill the kind of reconnaissance that freed up the other reconnaissance aircraft for doing other things that were more important somewhere else in the world.
Ernie,
Yes.
you mentioned that UAVs are used to follow up on Aurora contacts. Why?
Just for corroboration, the UAVs, because there's no survivability concerns, because they're small and they're fast, they can get in closer. The Aurora relies on its long-range sensors to kind of peer over there and say, yeah, that looks like it's interesting, kind of thing. We should look at that more closely. And it may be a gun emplacement. Well, you don't want to put an Aurora going into a gun emplacement because, as I said, it's a soft-skinned airplane. So you send a UAV in there and say, yep, that's a gun emplacement, and here's the kind of guns it has, and it's got 4 barrels and a crew of 10 or whatever. So yeah, it's to do things that the Aurora would be putting it in undue harm. If you got something that's more suited to do that kind of thing, don't use a soft-skin airplane with a crew of 10 or 12 people on it. Yes?
Your description of the trophy competition that was held this year reminded me of another item called the Fincastle Trophy. I take it that has been withdrawn from circulation or from competition.
Good question, Hugh. The question is that we used to have a thing that was sponsored by the British called the Fincastle competition. The answer is, I don't know. Since it was sponsored by the British, and it was the family of a gunner, a maritime gunner, that in fact sponsored the Fincastle Trophy, and the family was very specific as to who could compete. For example, it had to be Commonwealth countries. You know, Americans and other countries weren't allowed to compete because Mrs. Aird wanted the trophy, the Fincastle Trophy, to be a Commonwealth trophy. So now that the British aren't in it, and the British had always controlled the Fincastle competition, I honestly don't know what had happened. As an aside, when the Aurora first came into service in 1980, I took one of my 405 crews to Australia, and the Aurora, in its first debut in Fincastle, won the Fincastle Trophy. So what we did back in 1980 and what we're now doing in 2017 is a semblance of success.
What was the ranking of your Arctic competition? Canada was first, what about the other ones?
It was the article that I got information from didn't mention, but it was very, very close. I mean, between the first place and the second place team, it was a matter of minutes that they were doing. 2 of the 4 crews never did find the search and survival site, and what I thought was kind of neat, and the Aurora crew I thought was using the stuff between their ears, is when they had tracked the submarine and said, okay, we've got it down to attack criteria. We're going to leave the sonobuoys in the water, and we're going to go and take off early. And as it turns out, the submarine passed right through their attack area. Delivering an actual attack wasn't part of the criteria, but the criteria was to develop attack criteria. That is, get the submarine's position well enough knowing that you could attack it, but you don't have to attack it. So they left the sonobuoys in the water, knowing that the submarine was going to track through it, and took off with a search and rescue. And that's what earned them the 2 or 3 minutes that they won the competition by.
Do they do much low altitude flying with these?
Yes, yes. One of the things that maritime aircraft do is that we have, particularly across the North Atlantic and the North Pacific, there's an awful lot of commercial traffic going back and forth, and not all of it shows up on the AIS system. So they will dispatch a maritime surveillance aircraft to go and have a look, saying, what is this target that we have that nobody knows what it is? So you go down, and you go down to 100 feet so that you can read the name off the stern. You can see how many funnels it has. Through your infrared system, you can see where the engine room is. You can see what holds have cargo in them, what holds don't have cargo in them, where the crew quarters are the funnels hot, are the funnels cold, and you can get a whole bunch of intelligence. But you got to go down low to get that stuff.
Any more questions? One last question.
I just wondered, operating in this environment with the hot temperatures and the sand, did it have a bad effect on the serviceability or on the aircraft engines?
Yes, it did, and all I can say is it's a credit to our ground crews that they were able to keep things going as well as they did in that environment. I mean, there was no shelter, there were no hangars, the guys were working out of doors, didn't have to worry about rain and snow, that kind of good thing in the desert, but it was really hot, and there were periods when it was blowing sand. And yeah, and if you don't put all the plugs on the engine inlets and all the other inlets in the aircraft, they get filled up with sand. So it added to the maintenance problem immensely.
Didn't polish the turbine, please.
Yeah, I'm not aware that there were those kinds of problems. There may well could have been.
But a corollary to that is when they're parked on the tarmac here in the winter and they get covered with snow or ice, you cannot de-ice them as a standard aircraft. Working on the ice pad for a winter a few years ago, they brought one in and we could not de-ice it because of all the electronics and surfaces on it. We were not allowed to. We had to put it in a hangar. That's new to me, but it doesn't surprise me, as I just saw in some of the photos. The Aurora looks like a porcupine. It's got antennas poking out all over the place. No, just for the sonobuoy reference system alone, there are 16 antennas just for the wind system.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank Ernie. Hopefully, with your free membership, we'll see more of you in the next few months with the chapter.
Okay,
It's
thank you.
great having you back, and thank you again for a wonderful presentation. And before everybody moves, refreshments are outside, just outside the entrance. So thanks very much.